Well, greetings friends and welcome back. When I think about the possibility of atmospheric flight, I imagine some of the more majestic ships, the Fer-de-Lance, the Eagle, those sort of things gliding through the atmosphere. And then there's this, effectively a cinder block drop-kicked through space. And here we are standing on the deck in front of the Type 7, and it is huge and imposing, but at the same time, it has always looked strange to me with the canopy down so low. I'm kind of floating about 3 meters off the deck. It won't let me get any closer down, but this is now at about head height. So let's say maybe 7.5 to 8 meters off the ground for the bottom of the ship. But yet there's this entire section where the cockpit could have gone. And in my mind, the most logical place for it to go is actually right there where the symbol is. You'd have a really nice commanding view of the landing pad or whatever's below you, and you wouldn't be quite so vulnerable. Because as it is, the cockpit sort of sticks out like a boil ready to be popped by an aberrant Thargoid. And the fun continues around the back where you can see the sort of fist-style landing gear that we've seen on previous Lakon ships. But up above you, the doorway is all the way up there, probably 3.5 to 4 stories up in the air. Having said that though, if we go straight up in front of it, it is pretty much human-sized. It's probably 8 foot high in total. Those pipes on the sides are definitely not grab handles, though I'm not sure what on earth those are supposed to be. And these engines are again the same as previously discussed, the jacuzzi-sized, approximately 12-person jacuzzi up the top and about a 6 to 8 down the bottom there, with some more piping and greebling and various other bits and bobs. But that's enough of the outside. Oh, interestingly, I didn't realize you could actually look through that section. Well, that's something that isn't really obvious in 2D, but yeah, there is a whole sort of spot there, perfect for a stowaway to hide themselves in while, well, okay, they probably wouldn't survive the vacuum of space. Never mind. So starting as always in the most obvious view that you have seen a million times, we'll step around and say hello to Commander Headless, as always, positioned on her normal plinth type seat, which doesn't move. Now this deck and this cockpit and the panel in front of you is roughly about the same size as the one in the Asp Explorer. And I'll try and do the edges of it from over here. So the first edge of this cockpit panel would start here, and then it would go all the way to over there. So as you can see, it is a very large and sizable panel, about the length or a little bit longer than a single bed, and about the width of one from this corner here to that far edge there. A bit more of a detailed view of this can be found in some of the other Lakon ships, as it is identical. The projector here is the size of a dinner plate as always, and the square emitter for the main hologram is about 80 by 90 centimeters in size. We can see here the nicely lit Lakon systems. There's actually something underneath that. Interesting. It's actually just one of the textures from one of the panels that normally sits on the back, of which there actually aren't any in this ship, but on the back, like in the Type 6 or the Asp. So it's actually not a unique thing. It's just the very top of that panel, which then goes on to say Core Systems Analysis Overview, and it has those circles that we've seen before. Bizarre. Now, as you know yourselves, most of this canopy is glass, and you can see directly down into it. It seems to be held on by these struts. We can see that the struts come out from underneath the chair, as do those pipes, and then sort of come out there and hold either up or out that entire window section. So that's quite interesting the way that's constructed, and there's quite probably 2 meters from where I am down to that corner strut down the bottom, so it's quite a large area down there. I'll see if I can get down there in a minute. A couple of grab handles there around the sides. All of those are about a foot or so in width, so correct human size grab handle, as is this one, albeit you could probably grab that with 2 hands. Coming around the outside of the cockpit here, you can just see fairly plain metal holding the windows into place. And up there, that is definitely not a grab handle. That is a huge piece of something. It looks like a bumper bar or a tow hook. In fact, it looks like a bull bar from a 4-wheel drive that you would see driving around the outback in Australia. Down here we have more of the same, one of those orangey kind of panels down the front there, and underneath the front of the dash we have just those pipes coming out and down and underneath, and they seem to be almost identical on either side, not quite. So directly behind the Commander is a long walkway that I'm sure you have seen before, going all the way down towards the stairs. I'm slightly sunk down into it, but you can see it is quite a long distance to even reach the stairs, which I would just be touching now. There's just 3 of those as the tracking loses its mind up to the top deck, and we'll do our best to get in there in a second. However, this view allows us to go through the floor and show this section in a bit more detail. So you can actually see that underneath the seating area for the Commander is just this wide open empty space with some fairly low res texturing, just indicative of an area more than anything else. There's a bit of a step ladder up that side leading into what is a very cramped sort of section of ship where you might be able to climb up and then get yourself into this section from where you could sort of jump a step across to the lower section of the deck where the seat is, and then step up into there. Presumably that's what it's for, and that's how you would access the underneath of the Commander's chair itself. Immediately underneath the chair you see the end of those pipes coming in, and this sort of raised section that if we stick our head through, you can see it just has a few bits of polygonal kind of shapes, and that's about it really. And the same step ladder is repeated along the other side, along with the same red flashing light, and this section down here that you could sort of look out onto. And again, you have a great view surrounding pretty much in every direction you want to go through this huge glass window section. And continuing into the rear of the cockpit section, we'll get to the back door. And from here, you can see the interiors of these 2 sections. Now, I'm on a very strange angle to make this happen, so bear with me. But you can see that they are essentially identical little alcoves where someone could stand but not sit. And that is the weird thing about this ship. It seems very much large enough to be a multi-crew ship, and yet it is purely for 1 person, but there are these observation decks. So, now over here we see on both sides the same Lakon panels, the top of which you can see was what I was referring to, that sits above the panel at the front. And they're both the same sort of CRT kind of display that we have seen in all the Lakon ships. They're both the same, they say the same thing, and they're the same as all of those ship systems. Here we see another attempt by Frontier to make things look more interesting, whereas in fact they are actually something we have seen before, so just bits of that taken and put behind something else makes for a cool different display. I'm wondering if I stick my face into it, well, we actually don't see the rest of it, so it is just sliced away to be these different sections of display. Makes sense. Over here we have some ventilation structures, I suppose you could call them, although they do look very similar to the ones coming out that would have the screens on them, so they've shaken it up a little bit. Now here it gets a bit weird because we have something, so we are inside this observation section here, but we have a ventilation thing maybe, and the end of the deck, but it's all kind of black textured. And if we peek through it, there's nothing else on the outside. So it's a little bit weird to have modeled this section but then make it so dark that you can't actually see any details, nor in fact put any details in here. And if we look on the other side, it is exactly the same. There's a bit of a rail back there where you could perhaps store some luggage or something, but that's really about it. I'll see if this area lights up any better when we're outside, but certainly from here it is black as night. If we walk through this back door, albeit the floor level is kind of at my chest, but if we step through the back door you can see the orientation of the rest of the ship. So you can see the twin fist-shaped landing gear sitting there as the tracking craps itself, because I'm so far out of bounds it's not even funny, and the same thing down there, and underneath we see the rest of that external section. So in fact there could be another door coming into this section down here, but for whatever reason there is not. And there we can see the cargo bay and the rest of the interior of the ship, which is kind of unremarkable and, well, shaped like a brick. And now that we're out here, is there any better lighting or vision here? No. I mean, this is reflective, you can see, but it almost looks like they've hard cut the texture and just made it black. So it's not even a falling shadow, it's just literally a cut texture. And the same thing here, it is, you know, it just looks like paint dripping where they forgot to paint the rest of the texture underneath and they've just made it black. So yeah, clearly they're just preventing you from seeing this section. Alright, and as we launch, we'll watch these gear retract. Now we know they sort of come up into a fist shape previously from when I've basically been punched in the head by them. And there we are. So they retract kind of into the rear on the sides of those panels. Now, as I say, the interior of this thing is not terribly remarkable. It's probably 4 stories in height all the way up to the top there. And I'd say a good 50 to 60 meters in length in total. So it's a very large and long ship, as we know it should be for its huge cargo carrying capacity. And here from the underside again, we can see the insides of those textures where we are underneath the stairway itself. And there we can obviously see those 2 engines, which are very large. They appear to be the size of a double-decker bus each in terms of both height and length. So very sizable engines, presumably needing to be so big to propel such a large amount of cargo, I guess is the story you could tell yourself. And as we are out here further in space, you can see again that no matter what we do in terms of getting light into various sections of the ship, or indeed preventing light from getting in there, that this area is just going to stay entirely black and unlit, and there's nothing we can do about it. In fact, the shadows that are falling inside the ship seem to have no bearing whatsoever on this area. It's not getting darker, it's not getting lighter, it's just staying exactly as it is. So I don't think there's any way that we can shed any further light on this section. But here, through a fair amount of jankiness and strange camera angles, we can see what it would be like to stand on this little deck area and look down at the commander, or indeed look up at this roof that's immediately above us, just hexagonal sort of plastic shapes. And we can have a bit of a closer look at that cargo spot where we could store things. Again, the shadows and the blackness seem to persist on that side. A lot of work to be done on this one for space legs for sure. But yes, from here it would be quite a cool view watching the commander flying as we stand up here, although we have no actual function because, yeah, well, it's not a multi-crew ship. Now, if we deploy the hardpoints, the cool thing is obviously you can see them from here, and still standing here on this deck, you can even see them poking out, but we get much better view from down there. Let's give them a bit of a fire from here just to see what they look like, nicely lighting up the commander and the area around them. Very cool. And the funny thing, of course, is that even though these are only small hardpoints, this thing having 4 of them for some unknown reason, them being right here is kind of cool because you do get to see them come in and out and be sitting almost next to them as they fire away, which is pretty cool. And if we were to stand directly in front of it and watch it retract, we'll watch it go into the ship itself and disappear away behind that door. And if we stick our head through the door, we can see the interior of the small hardpoint there. And as we deploy, the thing will pop into place and then deploy out, which is pretty rad. Always enjoy that. If only they were not small hardpoints and something more impressive. Well, there we are, friends. I hope you enjoyed that look at the Flying Brick. It wasn't one of my favorite ships, but certainly one I used between the Type 6 and the Python when I had my strategy locked in and it was just cargo transport back and forth for probably days on end until I earned my way up to the Python. So an interesting ship. I'll be very entertained to see how this thing looks in atmospheric flight because, well, it's not particularly aerodynamic. Let's just put it nicely. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one, and I'll see you in the next one. Fly safe, Commanders.